Have you ever wondered why, despite Leonardo da Vinci's fame as one of the greatest geniuses of all time, we still know so little about the true secrets behind his painting technique? How is it possible that the man who gave us the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper left behind such an aura of mystery, even in the very brushstrokes that built his immortal works? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. The truth is, Leonardo's manuscripts, those scattered pages filled with sketches, coded notes, and enigmatic observations, are notoriously difficult to interpret. They are obscure, fragmented, and often written in a mirror-like script that adds yet another layer of complexity. Scholars have spent centuries trying to decode them, only to realize that when it comes to his painting technique, Leonardo seemed almost deliberately secretive. Very little written evidence tells us directly how he achieved the effects that continue to mesmerize us. Has this ever happened to you? Looking at one of his masterpieces and feeling that there's something hidden in the layers, something that refuses to be fully revealed? And here lies one of the biggest challenges: the understandable reluctance to take samples from his works. Think about it. Who would dare risk damaging the Mona Lisa just to analyze the pigments beneath the surface? Every brushstroke is priceless, every layer of varnish a piece of history. This limitation means that scientists, art historians, and researchers often have to rely on indirect clues, piecing together information from unfinished works, rare studies, or the faintest technical traces left behind. What you're about to hear is not a complete manual, but a fascinating journey into the hidden side of art history. Leonardo's technique is wrapped in both science and mystery. On one hand, he was a relentless observer of nature, experimenting with light, shadow, anatomy, and perspective. On the other, he concealed his methods in ways that even today feel like puzzles waiting to be solved. It's as if every painting is both a work of art and a coded message, an intentional act of brilliance designed to make us wonder. And isn't that exactly what makes him so timeless? As we go deeper, you'll see how even unfinished pieces like the Adoration of the Magi or Saint Jerome give us precious insight into the stages of his process. They act like windows into the workshop of a genius, showing us the hidden architecture beneath the surface, the whispers of lines and shading that never made it to completion. Imagine standing before one of those works, seeing not only what the eye perceives but also what lies beneath: the ghosts of sketches, the layers of preparation, the hesitant or bold corrections that reveal the human side of a legend. This is where the real fascination begins, because in Leonardo's art, nothing is ever just surface. Every blur of color, every imperceptible transition between light and dark, carries with it centuries of speculation. Scholars debate whether his secrets lie in the materials he used, in his layering process, or in a vision of painting that simply cannot be reduced to formulas. And yet, despite all the obscurity, the absence of clear records, and the limitations of scientific study, his works remain the ultimate testimony, silent, enigmatic, and yet more alive than ever. Stay with me, because in the next part, we'll step into those hidden layers and uncover how Leonardo transformed technical knowledge, instinct, and imagination into the smoky, almost supernatural effects that make his paintings unlike anything the world had seen before. If you enjoy uncovering hidden truths and exploring ideas that transform the way we see the world, make sure to subscribe to the channel. That way, you'll always have a place to return to for new insights, discoveries, and fascinating journeys. When we look at the scarce scientific data available and the unfinished works Leonardo left behind, it feels as though we are being invited behind the scenes of his creative process. These incomplete masterpieces are not failures or abandoned experiments. They are windows into the hidden truth of how his genius unfolded step by step. Take the Adoration of the Magi, for example. At first glance, it seems chaotic, filled with figures that never reached their final form. Yet beneath that apparent incompleteness lies an extraordinary revelation: the foundation of his method, the mindset that guided every decision, and the layers of preparation that carried his vision forward. It is as if we are witnessing not just a painting, but a transformation in real time. Leonardo rarely worked on blank surfaces. Instead, he chose walnut or poplar panels, materials both strong and receptive to the long journey he demanded from them. Imagine the impact of that decision. Centuries later, those wooden supports still hold the traces of his genius, but they were not ready to receive his brush immediately. He began by covering them with a preparation of gypsum and glue, creating a smooth, luminous ground that would reflect the light through the paint layers. Over this, he applied a layer of lead-white priming, a crucial step that turned the surface into something alive, capable of capturing every subtle shade of his imagination. What might seem like a technical detail is, in truth, a revelation about his way of thinking. Leonardo understood that the visible brilliance of a painting depends on what lies underneath. The mindset of preparation mattered as much as the visible strokes. He treated the foundation not as a mere necessity, but as part of the artistic journey itself, a decision that shaped everything that came after. It reminds us that transformation, whether in art or in life, often begins in the invisible stages, in the choices no one sees, but that determine the final impact. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because these early layers, these silent decisions, carry within them the key to understanding not only Leonardo's art, but also the hidden logic behind his technique. They are not just physical surfaces, they are the stage upon which light, shadow, and imagination would later dance, building the harmony that still captivates us today. If this resonates with you, write in the comments, "This makes sense to me." Your words will show how these hidden foundations speak not only of painting, but also of the unseen structures that shape every journey of creation. When we observe Leonardo's unfinished works, we are granted a rare opportunity to walk behind the scenes of his genius, almost as if we could stand by his side in the workshop. These incomplete canvases expose the construction stages that usually remain hidden beneath the surface layers. They reveal not only the technical process, but also the mindset of a man who saw painting as a journey of exploration, rather than a simple task to be completed. Each fragment of a line, each ghost of a brush stroke, carries the weight of decisions that shaped the final vision. It is in these details that the hidden truth of his art begins to unfold, showing us how transformation starts long before color touches the surface. One of the most fascinating aspects of this process is his use of the dry tip engraving. With this technique, Leonardo scratched architectural guidelines directly into the preparation layer. These incisions were not random. They were the structural skeleton, the invisible framework upon which the entire composition rested. Imagine the impact of this decision. A delicate etching in gypsum, becoming the silent foundation for works that would later astonish the world. It was a mindset rooted in foresight, in laying down order before allowing creativity to expand. Behind what seems like a simple gesture was the discipline of a visionary who knew that harmony requires structure. But Leonardo did not stop there. He reinforced his engravings with a blackish-brown wash, applied carefully with the brush. This dark liquid traced over the lines, fixing them into place, giving permanence to the ideas that had first been scratched into the surface. It was as if he was setting his thoughts in stone, creating an unshakable base from which the rest of the painting could grow. Here we see a revelation about his method, the balance between freedom and control, between the raw impulse of creation and the deliberate decision to anchor it. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because these early marks, both engraved and painted, are not just technical steps. They are the dialogue between the artist's inner vision and the material world. They remind us that every great journey begins with foundations we may not notice, yet those very foundations shape everything that follows. The faint scratches and the dark washes are more than preparation. They are the seeds of transformation that would later bloom into timeless masterpieces. If this perspective speaks to you, write in the comments, "I see the hidden layers." Because just like in Leonardo's art, recognizing what lies beneath can change the way we perceive the entire story. Leonardo's process was never rigid, and that is one of the hidden truths that makes his art feel so alive. At times, he resorted to techniques like cartoons and pouncing, transferring figures onto the surface with careful precision, but more often, he abandoned those aids altogether, trusting his own hand to guide him freely across the panel. This decision to draw directly, without intermediaries, speaks volumes about his mindset. It reveals a confidence born from years of relentless observation, a skill sharpened not only in the studio, but also in the streets, fields, and workshops, where he studied the movements of life itself. Behind the scenes of every freehand stroke was a journey of practice, error, and revelation that shaped his unshakable belief in intuition. Yet Leonardo was never afraid to change his mind. Within many of his works, we find variations and corrections, those famous pentimenti that expose his willingness to experiment. Unlike other painters who might have tried to hide their adjustments, Leonardo allowed them to remain, almost as silent witnesses to the transformation taking place. These shifts remind us that creation is rarely a straight line. It is a process of decisions, reconsiderations, and discoveries along the way. Each alteration whispers of his curiosity, his refusal to accept the first solution, his belief that perfection required constant refinement. It is here that his art becomes more than paint on wood. It becomes a record of a living dialogue between imagination and reality. To give form to his ideas, he sometimes turned to watercolor. With quick and broad strokes, he began shaping the draft volumes of bodies, marking shadows and sculpting light even in the earliest stages. These washes of color were not yet the final vision, but rather the skeleton of movement, the essence of depth waiting to be fully realized. There is something almost cinematic in this stage of his work. The outlines blur, tones overlap, and the figures begin to breathe before they are even complete. It is as if he wanted to capture the energy of transformation itself, freezing the moment where an idea shifts from thought into visible form. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because these gestures with watercolor reveal something profound about Leonardo's decisions. They show us that art for him was never static. It was movement, vibration, the constant negotiation between light and shadow. It was a journey in which every choice carried impact, shaping not only the work we see today, but also the invisible process that led to it. If you've ever felt the beauty of changing your mind, of reshaping something until it truly resonates, write in the comments, "I embrace the transformation." Because just like Leonardo's evolving brushstrokes, our own lives are filled with hidden layers that only reveal their meaning through change. Leonardo's early sketches often came alive through delicate washes of blue and red watercolors, subtle layers that breathed volume into the forms even before oil paint was introduced. These tones were not chosen at random. They carried meaning, intention, and above all, a deep understanding of how light itself transforms what we see. The blue, especially, created an ethereal quality, as if the figures were already surrounded by atmosphere, suspended in a space that felt more real than the flat surface beneath them. The red, on the other hand, brought warmth and vitality, anchoring the bodies with a pulse of life. Together, they marked the first step toward depth, a revelation that his art was always about. More than representation, it was about impact, about the hidden truth of perception. Interestingly, the blue Leonardo often used in this stage did not come from the expensive minerals his contemporaries sometimes employed, but from a humble vegetable dye, likely indigo. This choice reveals a fascinating mindset. Rather than relying on costly pigments to achieve magnificence, he trusted his decisions, his layering, and his vision to elevate even the simplest materials into something extraordinary. Behind the scenes, this speaks volumes. Transformation does not always demand rare resources, but instead the ability to see potential where others might see limits. That is part of Leonardo's genius, the power to turn ordinary elements into revelations. What makes this even more striking is how closely it aligned with his observations of the natural world. Leonardo noted that in the evening, when shadows fall upon a white wall, they do not appear gray or black, but blue. This single realization shaped his choices, guiding him toward colors that imitated reality, while also deepening its mystery. It was not just technique. It was a decision rooted in curiosity, a reflection of how he merged science and art into one inseparable journey. His paintings became laboratories of perception, where every stroke was a question, every shade a hypothesis tested against the laws of nature. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because this interplay of observation and creation shows us how Leonardo's mindset operated. He was not painting simply what he saw but what he understood, what he knew could transform a flat surface into a living experience. By trusting his own revelations about light and shadow, he redefined what painting could achieve, turning pigment and dye into windows of infinite depth. If you've ever looked at the world and noticed how a small detail changes everything, the color of a shadow, the way light falls, write in the comments, "I see the hidden truth," because just like Leonardo, it is often in those overlooked details that the greatest transformations begin. Once the drawing was in place, Leonardo introduced another layer that carried both technical and symbolic weight, a thin, semi-transparent primer of lead white mixed with linseed oil. At first glance, it might seem like a simple coating, but its impact went far beyond preparation. This veil transformed the sharp lines of the sketch into something softer, toning the entire surface with a subtle grayish haze. It was as if he were dimming the noise of what would not be developed, allowing the essential elements to remain visible while gently dissolving those he wished to abandon. The result was not only practical, but also poetic, an echo of his mindset that embraced both clarity and mystery. This layer also served as a protective barrier, preventing the future paints from seeping into the ground beneath. Behind the scenes, it reveals Leonardo's careful decisions about durability, showing us that his works were never just about immediate beauty, but about longevity, about resisting time itself. The hidden truth here is that every masterpiece depended on a foundation designed not just to shine in the present, but to endure for centuries. It is a reminder of how foresight and preparation can transform an idea into something lasting, how invisible choices can carry the greatest impact. And yet, even in such a seemingly calculated step, Leonardo allowed humanity to leave its mark. Scientific studies show that in some paintings, the primer was spread with his own hands. His fingerprints remain embedded in the very surface, silent witnesses of the moment when genius touched the material directly. These traces are more than technical curiosities. They are revelations, a bridge across time that lets us feel the presence of the artist himself. It is as though the journey of creation preserved not just the image, but the touch of the man who made it. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because those faint fingerprints and delicate veils of primer tell us something essential about Leonardo's approach. His art was never just about control. It was about dialogue between precision and spontaneity, discipline and freedom. Even the most technical layers carried a touch of vulnerability, a human presence hidden beneath the perfection of the finished work. That is the paradox that makes his paintings resonate. They are at once eternal and deeply personal. If this idea moves you, write in the comments, "I feel the human touch," because recognizing that even behind perfection lies a trace of humanity changes the way we perceive not only Leonardo's journey, but also our own. Even in the earliest layers of his paintings, Leonardo was already testing ideas that would later define his genius. Scientific analysis reveals that his primers often carried traces of carbon black, a subtle addition that suggests he was experimenting with chiaroscuro long before the visible brushstrokes took shape. Imagine this moment, the surface still fresh, the primer not yet dry, and Leonardo already thinking about light and shadow, about how depth could emerge from contrast. It shows us the mindset of someone who never separated preparation from creation, for whom every step was part of a larger vision. The hidden truth is that even the foundations of his art were alive with intention. Once the surface had settled, he shifted into what we might call the pictorial phase, beginning with a warm yellow-brown underlayer. This wasn't decoration, but structure, a deliberate decision to establish harmony before any detail was added. The tone enveloped the entire surface, defining areas and volumes, providing a sense of relief that made the figures feel as though they were already beginning to step out of the panel. It was the first visible act of transformation, turning a flat ground into the suggestion of form, space, and atmosphere. Behind the scenes of this, simple color lay the seeds of an extraordinary journey, a base that would support layers upon layers of subtle decisions. From there, he built the underpainting with brown mixed with green pigments, a tonal foundation that shaped both skin and shadow. These muted shades gave him control over depth, ensuring that when brighter tones and highlights were later applied, they would resonate with greater intensity. What fascinates us is how much power he gave to restraint. Instead of rushing to brilliance, he laid down quiet layers, humble in appearance, but essential in impact. It is a revelation about patience, about the wisdom of preparing space for light to emerge, rather than forcing it too soon. Leonardo understood that depth is born from contrast, that beauty often hides in the interplay between what is revealed and what remains in shadow. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because these early tonal layers carry a lesson not only in painting but in perspective. They remind us that every visible triumph rests on invisible groundwork, that the strength of what shines depends on the care given to what lies beneath. Leonardo's journey shows that transformation begins in silence, in muted tones and deliberate choices, waiting for the right moment to reveal their true brilliance. If this resonates with you, write in the comments, "I value the hidden foundation," because recognizing the power of what is unseen changes the way we look at art, and perhaps the way we look at life itself. With the foundation of muted tones in place, Leonardo began to intensify his dialogue with light and shadow. Using monochrome brush strokes of burnt umber, he reinforced the chiaroscuro, deepening the shadows that would give volume and relief to the figures. This wasn't merely about adding darkness, it was about sculpting presence. The figures gained weight, the architecture gained depth, and the painting itself began to breathe, as if light and shade were locked in a constant negotiation. It was a revelation of how he saw the world, not as flat surfaces, but as living forms shaped by contrast. What makes this stage even more fascinating is the way Leonardo sometimes set aside his brush and turned to his own hands. He would apply paint with his fingers, blurring the edges of forms, softening contours until they dissolved into one another. Imagine the intimacy of that gesture, the artist physically blending pigment into the surface, using touch to create transitions so subtle that centuries later they remain almost imperceptible. Behind the scenes, this tactile approach reveals his willingness to break boundaries, to trust instinct as much as calculation. It was a decision that merged control with spontaneity, leaving behind textures that still carry his human presence. Of course, Leonardo did not abandon the brush. He alternated between tools, refining details with bristles when precision was needed. Each stroke, whether from fingertip or brush, had its purpose, expanding his arsenal of effects. This blending of methods speaks to his mindset of transformation, his belief that no single approach could capture the complexity of reality. The result was a surface alive with variation, transitions so smooth they seemed to vanish, and textures that shifted with the eye of the viewer. It is here that we see not just an artist at work, but a thinker experimenting, a visionary making decisions that fuse technique with philosophy. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because these moments of blurred contours and softened lines reveal more than a style. They embody a worldview. Leonardo understood that clarity and mystery were not opposites, but partners. By allowing forms to dissolve, he invited the viewer into the painting, urging us to complete the image with our own perception. This hidden truth is what makes his art so timeless. It is not just a depiction of reality, but a dialogue with it, an open space where imagination can wander. If this perspective resonates with you, write in the comments, "I see beyond the lines," because Leonardo's genius reminds us that sometimes the most powerful revelations are found not in what is defined, but in what is left to the eye to discover. As the underlayer was still fresh, Leonardo began to breathe life into the forms with delicate touches of white. These early highlights were not just accents of brightness. They were decisions that gave volume and relief, sculpting the figures before our eyes. It was almost as if he was carving light into the surface, anticipating how the play of illumination would one day animate the finished scene. This subtle act reminds us that transformation often starts with the smallest gestures, quiet choices that later shape the entire impact of a masterpiece. But what truly sets Leonardo apart is what followed. On top of these foundations, he built outer paint layers of extraordinary complexity, applying not one or two coatings, but sometimes as many as 30 ultra-thin glazes. Imagine the patience, the discipline, the vision required for such a process. Each glaze was so delicate that it barely concealed what lay beneath, yet together they created a depth and luminosity no single stroke could achieve. Scientific analysis has revealed this layering as one of the hidden truths of his art, showing us that behind the apparent effortlessness of his paintings was a meticulous journey of decisions that stretched across time. This approach was not without precedent. Flemish painters also used glazes, but Leonardo's mindset transformed the practice entirely. Where the Flemish tradition relied on glazes to sharpen contours and define clear boundaries, he sought the opposite. He blurred the edges, dissolved the outlines, and created transitions so smooth they seemed to hover between reality and dream. His intention was not clarity, but subtlety, not precision of line, but the mystery of atmosphere. By doing so, he redefined the very language of painting, shifting its purpose from mere representation to revelation. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because these glazes are more than technical brilliance. They embody a philosophy. They show us that life, like art, is not about rigid separations, but about blending, about the gradations that connect one state to another. Leonardo's choice to blur instead of define was a decision that echoed beyond art. It was a reflection of his understanding that transformation happens in the spaces between, in the transitions where shadow meets light. It is this hidden truth that makes his work timeless. He painted not just what he saw, but the invisible movement that exists between moments. If this vision resonates with you, write in the comments, "I believe in subtle transitions." Because just like in Leonardo's paintings, it is often in the soft, imperceptible shifts that the greatest revelations are found. Leonardo himself described the visual effect he sought as smoke, a delicate atmosphere where forms seem to dissolve into air rather than end in sharp outlines. This decision was not simply a matter of style, it was a revelation about perception. By softening edges, he created depth that felt alive, as if figures were emerging from a veil of mystery rather than existing as flat, isolated objects. The mindset behind this choice reflects his desire to capture the transitions of nature, the imperceptible ways in which one tone melts into another, just as dawn melts into daylight or thought drifts into dream. It was art as transformation, where painting became less about fixing reality and more about recreating its fluidity. This technique came to be known as sfumato, a name that carries the essence of fading smoke. Built from countless transparent and semi-transparent layers, it blurred boundaries and forced the viewer to see not only the figure, but also the atmosphere that surrounded it. Behind the scenes, this layering was a journey of patience and vision. Each glaze, nearly invisible on its own, carried impact when combined with dozens of others, producing depth that no single stroke could match. Leonardo's decisions here show a hidden truth. Mastery is not always in bold gestures, but in the discipline of subtle repetition, in trusting that small, almost invisible actions can build to extraordinary revelations. And yet, despite this technical brilliance, his process remained profoundly human. Leonardo often blended paint not only with brushes but with his fingertips, rubbing the surface in circular motions until the colors dissolved into one another without leaving a trace of bristles. This physical contact between hand and panel created transitions so smooth that even under a microscope, individual strokes nearly vanish. It's as though his very touch became part of the painting's atmosphere, embedding his presence into the fading light and shadow. This tactile intimacy is another reminder of the hidden layers that connect creator and creation, the fingerprints of a journey that combined science, instinct, and imagination. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic because sfumato is not merely a technique, it is a philosophy. It suggests that life itself is made of dissolving edges, of moments that flow into one another with no clear boundary. Leonardo captured this truth not by defining lines, but by erasing them, teaching us that the impact of art often lies in what is suggested, rather than what is declared. If this perspective resonates with you, write in the comments, "I see the beauty in the blur," because sometimes the most powerful transformations happen not in clarity, but in the soft spaces where forms begin to fade. Leonardo's mastery wasn't limited to layering glazes. His hands and tools became instruments of nuance, capable of producing effects that felt more like whispers than declarations. He would rub and dab the paint, modulating tones with gestures so subtle that they carried the intimacy of a personal dialogue with the canvas. Each movement enriched the fading transitions of light and shadow, giving his work that unmistakable sense of atmosphere where boundaries dissolved and forms seemed to hover between visibility and disappearance. These were not random touches. They were deliberate decisions that revealed his mindset of transformation, his belief that even the smallest actions could alter the entire impact of a scene. Among the most fascinating of his methods was what he called smorzatura. Here, he layered light glazes over dark and dark glazes over light, creating a dynamic interplay that defied conventional logic. Instead of rigid separations, he built tonal bridges, subtle revelations that coaxed the eye to move across the surface without interruption. This technique allowed him to achieve depth not by force, but by persuasion, guiding the viewer gently through the painting's journey of light. It was a hidden truth of his process. Harmony is often born from contrast, but only when contrast is softened by patience and vision. He also turned to the dry brush technique, dragging sparse pigment across dry surfaces with a hard, short bristle. This created delicate gradations, faint textures that were almost imperceptible but vital to the painting's emotional resonance. These strokes, poor in binder yet rich in effect, added a tactile vibration to the surface, reminding us that even restraint carries power. It is behind the scenes of these quiet methods that we see Leonardo's genius most clearly, an artist who understood that presence is not always about boldness, but about subtlety, about decisions so refined they leave no visible trace, yet transform the whole. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because these gestures, rubbing, dabbing, layering, and brushing, are not just technical tricks. They reflect a philosophy of creation where nothing is wasted, where every touch contributes to the atmosphere, and where the boundaries between light and dark dissolve into a continuum of perception. Leonardo's journey shows us that impact is often born from what seems invisible, from choices so delicate they almost escape notice, yet their absence would unravel the magic entirely. If this reflection speaks to you, write in the comments, "I value the subtle gestures," because, as Leonardo reminds us, transformation often begins in the details no one else sees. Leonardo reached a level of refinement where the transitions between light and dark became so imperceptible that even under the scrutiny of modern microscopes, the brush strokes themselves seem to vanish. What appears to the eye is not the mark of a hand, but the illusion of life, a surface where boundaries dissolve into atmosphere. This was no accident. It was the result of a mindset shaped by patience, precision, and the decision to prioritize subtlety over spectacle. He was not simply painting figures. He was crafting revelations of light, building a hidden truth in which the material world and perception merged seamlessly. Achieving this required more than talent. It demanded innovation. To create layers of such transparency, Leonardo relied on oil binders that allowed the pigments to remain suspended in delicate films. This gave him the ability to apply color in ways that glowed rather than sat flat, creating effects that seemed almost immaterial. Behind the scenes, this choice reveals a transformative moment in art history, when the medium itself became part of the message. Oil was not just a tool but a collaborator in the journey, enabling effects no other technique could achieve. Within this framework, he drew from a wide palette of traditional pigments, each chosen for its unique impact. Lead white, cinnabar, earthy ochres, azurite, and the precious lapis lazuli were all part of his arsenal. These pigments were not simply applied, They were orchestrated, combined, and layered to produce tones so nuanced that they felt infinite. The cool blues could shift into warmth with the subtlest glaze, while reds and yellows pulsed with lifelike intensity when balanced against shadows. Every decision carried weight, each choice of pigment contributing to the harmony of the whole. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because these invisible transitions and carefully selected materials speak of more than technical mastery. They speak of transformation. Leonardo understood that painting was not only about depicting reality but about reshaping how we experience it. By erasing the evidence of his hand, by merging pigments into seamless tones, he left us with images that feel alive, as though their truth exists beyond paint. This hidden journey from material to immaterial is what gives his works their timeless impact. If this perspective resonates with you, write in the comments, "I see life in the colors," because Leonardo's genius reminds us that even the smallest particles of pigment, when guided with vision, can carry the weight of eternity. When Leonardo turned his attention to flesh, his palette revealed the depth of his sensitivity to the human form. He reached for cinnabar to provide vibrant reds, yellow ochre to capture the warmth of living skin, and umber to ground the shadows in earthy tones. This combination was not chosen simply for visual effect but for impact, the hidden truth that skin is not a flat surface, but a living interplay of warmth, coolness, and depth. Through these pigments, his figures gained more than resemblance. They carried presence, as if blood pulsed beneath the painted surface. The transformation from pigment to flesh was complete, and it was achieved not through bold outlines, but through subtle gradations that made his subjects feel alive. In landscapes, his choices expanded into another spectrum of possibilities. Ochre, green earth, and lead tin yellow shaped the fields and ground, while the skies opened with layers of lead, white, and azurite, crowned by ultramarine glazes that shimmered like infinity. To use ultramarine, a pigment more precious than gold at the time, was a decision that went beyond technique. It was a revelation of his vision, his willingness to invest in the rarest materials to express the boundless vastness of nature. Behind the scenes of these choices lies a mindset of daring, one that saw no separation between art and science, between expense and necessity, when the goal was to capture truth. And in these landscapes, another transformation occurred. Leonardo applied the principles of sfumato not only to figures but to space itself. What became known as atmospheric perspective was his way of studying how air and distance shape what we see. He observed that the further an object is from us, the more the light softens, the outlines blur, and the colors shift toward blue. He turned this observation into practice, making distant mountains dissolve into haze, blending earth and sky in a continuum that mirrors the way our eyes naturally perceive the world. It was more than painting. It was revelation, a new way of understanding space and perception. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because in Leonardo's landscapes, we see not just scenery, but philosophy. The fading contours, the softened tones, the blending of light and air, all of it speaks of a worldview where everything is interconnected, where distance itself becomes part of the narrative. It reminds us that art is not only about reproducing what is visible, but about capturing the invisible forces that shape our experience of reality. If this resonates with you, write in the comments, "I see depth in the distance," because like Leonardo's skies and horizons, our own journeys are often defined not by what is close at hand, but by the vast and mysterious spaces that lie just beyond. Leonardo's eye was endlessly curious about how the world reveals itself through distance. He noticed that air itself is not a transparent void, but a living filter, a veil that changes the way we perceive objects as they recede from us. With each added layer of atmosphere, contours lost their sharpness, colors softened, and everything seemed to drift into shades of blue. This revelation shaped his landscapes, where the foregrounds remained crisp and detailed, while the backgrounds dissolved gradually into mist, creating a sense of infinite depth. It was more than representation. It was transformation, turning the act of looking into an experience of journeying through space. His decision to blur what was far away while sharpening what was near gave his works a hidden truth. Reality is not static, but dynamic, always shifting according to perspective. At the heart of this mastery was his choice of materials. Leonardo often preferred walnut oil as his binder, a medium that provided flexibility and clarity, allowing his pigments to shine through in their layered brilliance. Yet he avoided the finishing varnishes that many of his contemporaries used to seal and brighten their works. Instead, his approach relied on the slow build of translucent glazes, each one altering the light just enough to give the surface an inner radiance. This choice reflects his mindset, a belief that true impact comes not from surface polish, but from depth, from what lies within the layers. It was a decision that carried long-term consequences, leaving his paintings with a softness and fragility that make them feel almost alive, as though they continue to breathe centuries later. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because these seemingly technical choices reveal more than technique. They reveal philosophy. Leonardo understood that the world is never fixed, that clarity and obscurity coexist, that permanence is an illusion. By relying on layers rather than final coatings, he accepted the vulnerability of his works, choosing authenticity over durability. And perhaps that is the greatest revelation. The impact of his art lies not in its resistance to time, but in its ability to remind us of transience, of the beauty found in impermanence. If this reflection resonates with you, write in the comments, "I find beauty in impermanence." Because, like Leonardo's glazes fading into atmosphere, some truths are most powerful precisely because they are fleeting. And if you've made it all the way here with me, it means this journey through Leonardo's hidden layers resonated with you in some way. That's exactly why I'd love for you to subscribe, so you don't miss the next explorations where we keep uncovering the stories, the revelations, and the transformations hidden behind great works of art. Leave me a sign in the comments that you've stayed until the end by writing, "I'm with you until the end." It's always special to see who walks through the entire journey together. And if you felt connected to what we explored today, give this video a like. It's a simple gesture, but it keeps this conversation alive between us. There's a video right here that complements this topic. Click and continue with me over there, and let's keep unraveling these mysteries side by side.